Okay, everybody, welcome back. I hope you've had some more to eat and to drink, and this is an opportunity. We've got plenty of time, and don't worry, we're not going to constrain you to be here till 4, but if we want to, we've got the space. I know that there are a lot of you out there who also are doing fantastic work in these areas and have your own experiences to share. So this is a forum for you to speak up and tell us who you are, what you're doing, any questions, any critiques, any comments that you have about what our speakers have said. It's also for our speakers to challenge you, to ask you questions, so I'm going to open it up as a forum. Of course, being a beautiful event, we're going to keep it as collaborative and collegial and happy and fun as possible, but we are dealing with some pretty serious stuff as well. So let's see how we go. Who'd like to start? Great. I'll start pointing the finger to being naughty.
I could ask a question.
Yes.
There's been a lot written about male homosexuality, but not much about lesbianism. Do either of the two speakers have any access to lesbian archives? Or I know there's been a few books published which have listed famous people in history who've been either gay males or gay females, but there's not much in terms of the sort of history. I think less so in the case of lesbianism, simply because of Queen Victoria's attitude.
Before you start, can I just say 2 things I forgot? And that is, if you'd like, please introduce who you are, if you feel comfortable about your name. And also, Palmina who's one of our wonderful committee members, has a roving mic for people who'd like to speak into the mic, if you feel comfortable enough to do so. So you were, sorry?
My name's Keith Gaze. I had a lot to do with the Uniting Church.
Great, thank you.
Great. So I'm starting then. Is it
on? Oh, okay, there we go. All right. I don't really know a lot of history about. I'm thinking about just about Jewish lesbians. I don't think there's been many Jewish lesbian Olympians, because I did look up Jews who have won any gold medals and I couldn't find any. We're not very sporty.
Did you Google?
Yeah, totally. That was a quiet day. So no, in terms of history, I don't know much. There's obviously writers such as Joan Nessel who have written extensively on, and Leslie Newman in the States who have written extensively recently, and they're the ones that I've read and that I've had understandings of. But historically, I'm not so great on it. I'm sure there are other audience members who know more about the history of Jewish lesbians, but if they don't wish to speak, that's fine. Ali?
Geez, the only queer Muslim that comes to my mind that's pretty out there is a Canadian feminist of East African origin, Irshad Manji, and she's a bit of a pint-sized powerhouse. In fact, she came and spoke to the AGMC in 2006, I think, or 4. I can't remember exactly, but she did come and have a chat with us about her book and about her experiences. So she's the only one who probably comes straight out to mind who's pretty much out there. Obviously, Maddie and I are talking about specifically from Jewish and Muslim backgrounds. I think, though, if you do think about just Googling, good old Google, what would we do without it? It's a verb now, isn't it? So if you do Google just, I think, queer and Muslim and academic, you actually do get quite a few from the US and from, again, Canada and England, but I can't think of anyone in Australia. I'm not published yet. But so cheeky. But
we'll hear about it when she is.
but I can't think of any women right now who actually do identify as lesbian or bisexual or queer who are out there. Joseph? Got a woman?
Obviously, I'm not a lesbian, that's not one of my descriptions, but when I wrote the book, I made a special effort to try and include lesbians, and it was not easy. Malta had a president, and she's now passed away. Her name was Agatha Barbara. She was your typically stereotypical butch lesbian, and she could outswear a man, you know, without a moment's notice. She was a lovely woman, but she spoke her mind pretty, you know, without any reservation. The problem I had was how to mention her in the book without actually, you know, trying to say that she was a lesbian when everybody knew that she was a lesbian, because I had no proof. So I approached it in a very, very legal way. What happened within about, say, a few months of my book appearing, all of a sudden the newspapers started to describe her as a lesbian. And then her former partners started to come out. And it turned out, Malta has a number of islands, but it turned out that she had 2 girlfriends, one on each of the 2 main islands. And a few comments were made, and I tried to diffuse that, and you know, because some people were sort of expressing, you know, surprise, and they were dismayed that she had 2 girlfriends, and I simply wrote that, you know, at least she had 2 girlfriends more than I ever had. But you know, my experience with, certainly the Maltese experience, what that has shown me is that there's a group of lesbians who are really out and proud, and who in fact can be far more activist than the men. This is within the Maltese context. And yet there's a larger group of lesbians that really seem to prefer to remain invisible. And that's just one of those things you have to deal with if you're going to write about history. You know, try and locate these women because they are around, and you can usually, you know, you can, for example, there were 2 other main women who used to run a bar, and everybody knew they were lesbians, but no one would identify them as lesbians. And I remember walking into a bar, and somebody mentioned these 2 women, and I referred to them as lesbians, and everybody looked at me, and it wasn't a surprise of, you know, they weren't horrified, but they were surprised that I knew, and that was the interesting thing.
Thank you. I think Maurice has got something to say as well. So something about gender, and there's a whole other issue that we haven't covered very much today, around gender and power. Yep, Maurice, did you want to go? Okay.
My name's Ken Stewart.
Do you need the microphone, Ken?
I was interested in Maddie going to Israel, and is it first of all, it's a patriarchal religion, which seems to have that overhead of it. But would you have actually gone to Israel, or not Jews specifically, but Jewish people that are gay may go to Israel because the Jewish religion in general doesn't absolve them from their sexuality or their spirituality? Then when I've heard that when they do go to Israel, they find a whole lot of gay people there. They've gone there for the same reason. Is that a truth in that?
I don't know heaps about the gay community in Israel. I know that Tel Aviv's a big gay party town, and a lot of people from other conservative countries around Israel will go to Tel Aviv to party, and the gay bars there are quite well known. I never actually went and partied there, but it's something that should be on my list of things to do. In terms of it being a patriarchal religion, I was brought up as a liberal Jew, so a progressive Jew, and so that I guess, you know, that's one of the more progressive religions in a lot of ways. There are lesbian rabbis, and there's same-sex marriage in the States, and you know and I think the Union of Progressive Jews has in Australia has said that they will perform same-sex marriages, and there have been a couple in Sydney. So, you know, from that vein, it's quite progressive. Whereas the conservative and Orthodox Jewish synagogues and organisations are far less progressive, and you know, men and women are seated separately, and it would be less acceptable to be gay or lesbian, and obviously far less feminist. So, and the Jewish school that I went to was a progressive school, so I was always brought up with that, you know, with a feminist understanding and with a progressive understanding of religion. So for me, it's not like I've broken from an orthodox patriarchal perspective. I hope that answered the question.
Yeah.
Yeah, comments or questions? Just, yeah, that's good.
Can I make a comment?
Yes, would you like to say who you are first, if you want to? Good.
My name is Aswin. I'm a health educator with the Victorian AIDS Council. Actually, today is very nice for me to see that a bunch of 5 different experiences are very much tied into their religious belief. My work, I work with a lot of gay men, and we seen a lot of I think gay men that come through the workshop that we go through. We have to do actually unpack the damages that actually have been done by a major religious organization out there. We spend 6 weeks with the men, but the impact, we actually talk and allow the men to actually talk about different experiences, and some are very, very horrendous. I think it's just heartbreaking to see that how the religious can be so damaging, but this is absolutely amazing, uplifting experience for me to hear that these are amazing bunch of people who actually be able to manage and navigate their lives through it. Thank you.
Actually, thank you. Can I ask, Asvin, can I ask you what 2 or 3 things that you do then in response to the men that you're working with? I'm putting you on the spot now, but just overview.
What the workshop do is that we don't tell people what to do. We have a set of agenda, which is basically our aim is to do HIV/AIDS prevention education. Come with that is the actual technical information about prevention itself stand alone useless. We need to marry the technical information into the lived context, very much around love, sex and intimacy, family, religious background and that kind of thing. What we do is that we create a space for people to actually talk about and unpack the damaging that they actually experience in a number of ways. One of them is religious. It's one of the major stuff that we have to deal with constantly. A lot of people's feedback from them is just about, oh, thank God that we're here. And one of the most powerful feedback that I received from one of my participants is that a big, long, extended, almost an essay to talk about few words that actually stopped me, got me into tears. Was that suicidal thoughts stopped. That wow. Because of the religious, how he had to actually went through it and where he is at that point in time, and then after the 6 weeks, what is actually done for him. And I think also talk about Shanton experiences being I also run a workshop for gay Asian men only, and then he's my best friend, so 120 kilograms. Here we go. We have a very different experiences and things like that. I think that it's about bring about point A to point B and C. I think the diversity within our experiences is absolutely amazing to see that we have a different sense of experience and that kind of thing. Having said that, though, the sexual racism within the gay men's sexual space is absolutely disgusting. And I use the word disgusting. That I have spoken to some of the women, from the Yellow Kitties girls and that kind of thing. I thought, do you experience that as intensely as we do as gay men? They go, what's that? I thought, oh, wow, man, what's going on here?
Good points. Thank you. Other questions or comments? Harriet? And please do feel free to comment on your own work and life. It's important.
Good afternoon. I'm a theosophist myself, which is not a religion per se. I do come from a multicultural religious background, however, including Jewish, Catholic, Lutheran, and anything else. I think I was christened Church of England, rather ironically. But I don't really wish to talk about myself so much as to acknowledge some women in history who were activists in their own right. That was Lillian Faderman, a Jewish writer, amazing woman, activist. Dieter Cobb. Does anyone remember Dieter Cobb? Jewish woman, a TV presenter, radio person from Sydney, but originally from Germany, and Jewish. The other lady is Mary Daly. Does anyone know her, remember her? Amazing Catholic teacher, activist, and philosopher, who, by the way, I have read a lot of her books, who never once mentioned being a lesbian. But has anyone ever seen her photo? Interesting woman, that. But, we celebrate past and present, and I just want to say thank you to the panel and to the organisers. This is the first time I've ever ever been in a forum like this, and it's mind-blowing and enlifting for me. Thank you.
Thank you. Michael?
I'm not just the photographer here today. My name's Michael Barnett. Some of you may know me and some of you may not. I was actually a former committee member of the AGMC, and I know the amount of hard work that they do, so I'd like to say thank you for doing today. And I've also been an out gay man since 1995, so it's about 14 or so years. And I was born Jewish, so that makes me of that faith for about 40 years now. I think they'll never let me escape it. And I've been involved with a Jewish, now GLBT, social and support group called Aleph Melbourne. So I think I've got a few relevant qualifications to talk here today. I just wanted to look at the topic of the conversation, and is my sexuality more important than my culture or religion, and put it into some context for me. I was born in Melbourne in 1969, and around the same time, when I was 10, I started noticing guys around me, my age. Started feeling an attraction at the age of 10 to men and boys, school and all over the place. And at the same time as that, I think, and completely independently, I started looking at the way that my parents had been bringing me up in a religious Jewish context. Somewhat orthodox, somewhat traditional, somewhat make it up as you go along. And I think some of us can relate to that. And looking at that, thinking, what does it mean to me, and why am I being asked to do the things that they're asking of me? The whole boy attraction thing is on one side, and there was no conflict at that stage of my life, but I wasn't being encouraged to explore that through my family and friends, or community at the time. And over the years, I've been able to reconcile my sexuality on my own without support of friends or family. At the age of 26, I came out and to the world and said, I'm Michael and I'm attracted to men. And at the age of 40, I'm coming to that second coming out in my life, where I actually think in my life that religion is no longer an important part of my life, and I find that it's a more of a hindrance, and it's in some ways it doesn't let me. It doesn't let me be who I am, having to hold the values that my family brought me into this world. In the same way that they denied me the opportunity to be a gay man, they also forced upon me a set of values that I had no choice in. So I had no choice in the being brought up as heterosexual, and I had no choice in the being brought up as Jewish. And whilst over the years both of those upbringings have formed who I am, I've been able to make some decisions in my life as to how I want to live my life without other people's values being put upon me. It's really hard for me to talk about this because it's so personal, but the religion in my life is not important personally. It's important to me that it allows me to be with my family and connect with my community that I grew up with, but it doesn't mean anything to me personally. My sexuality is important to me because it allows me to connect with my partner and my other community. And there's a bridge there between the two of them, but personally the religion that I was brought up with means nothing to me. Because I don't identify with that. I don't identify with being heterosexual either, so I think my growing up and my path, I have to question how I was brought up and what's important to me. I think it's important that we all question who we are. Ask the questions. You don't have to have an answer. Don't let society tell you who you are, and just be yourself.
Thank you. Can I just add to that, for someone who does not, follow his religion, the activism and the work and the lobbying that you have been doing with Jewish hierarchies, if I can use that word, over the years, and especially recently. Thank you.
Hi, my name's Leslie. I apologise now because I'm not really sure how I will formulate my question or what I'm about to say. My background's a little bit mixed. My mother is Native American. I don't have a lot to do with the culture, Canadian Native American culture, and my dad's Mennonite Dutch background, which I don't have a lot to do with either. because I migrated here when I was 8 years old. But what I do know of some of the about the Native American culture. Of course, it's so diverse because there's so many different nations, and the only bits that I do know is what I've read about my culture, and most of what I've read is of written by Western people, which is usually wrong anyway. But I do know, which is true, is in many hundreds of years ago, there are in native culture people who are called two-spirited people, and people were recognised. There was transgendered people, so, and as they got to a certain age, they did have a choice of doing men's roles or women's roles. There are known women who were warriors who took on women as wives, and also of men who took on women's roles.
Hello?
Yeah, and of course that depends on, there's not always, it's from one nation is very different to another nation, so I'm not sure exactly, I can't remember which nation it was from. So, yeah, I just wanted to put that to everyone that, therefore sexuality is involved in culture and spirituality, but unfortunately because of westernisation and religious, the push onto that culture, of course that is now changed, where a lot of lesbians and gay men are not recognised in their culture and is often thrown aside.
Yeah, thank you. Anyone from the panel? If I could just add a personal note, as an academic, one of the things I think we should all be pushing in our research in our communities, whatever they are, is research back into and reclaiming the histories and women's histories and sexual histories that have just kind of been clamped by colonialism and dare I say, in the broader sense, Christianity. So I think that's a very important. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that Leslie's point is really important, because probably in some of those nations, people didn't have to make a choice.
Yep.
They didn't have to decide whether they were going to choose to stay and belong to a culture or a spirituality, or be gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, intersex. Whereas today, some people are forced to make those kind of decisions, and I know that our spirituality isn't the same as religion. We can all have a relationship with God independent of a spiritual organisation or religious organisation, but a religious organisation can help us to come closer to God through the support and the unity and the encouragement that you get from fellow participants in that organisation. And what I'd like to hear from some of the panel members, particularly a few of you mentioned that perhaps like you'd become friars or you were intending on, becoming priests, etc. What kind of sadness came along with a decision to leave, or being forced to leave because you couldn't be out and be actively involved in the spiritual organisation that you belonged to?
Good question. Thank you.
First of all, I belonged, as I said, to a society which was called Society of Christian Doctrine. It was the equivalent of Opus Dei in Malta. Now, when I started writing the book, it dawned on me that its founder was in fact homosexual, and he was only canonized in the last few years by this great pope. I in fact attended the funeral of Don George Breaker in '63, which a few years before I came to Australia. But as I said, the tension came about when I joined the Franciscans, because for the first time people started to talk about homosexuality as a sexual orientation. Previously it was just a sin, a temptation like many others. So there was no issue. Okay, it was just a matter of overcoming that particular temptation. After joining the Franciscans, there were a lot of problems there, not really over my sexuality, but the whole order was going through a bit of a transformation. I joined the Brothers of St. Jared. The Brothers of St. Jared were disbanded by the church in Sydney. They were disbanded because the founder, whom we regarded as a holy man, was in fact charged. A number of novice masters were charged. All of them spent some time in prison. I can tell you that life in that monastery was quite exciting. I'd like to go back to those days. Club 80, believe me, was nothing. Had nothing on it. You know, they were the most beautiful looking men, and in there I was... He wants to know what Club 80 is. Well, you know, that was a very different life. But I think when we talk about Catholicism, and I will talk about Catholicism, we often think of Catholicism as though it's only a matter of spirituality, a matter of religion. You've got to remember that Oscar Wilde converted to Catholicism on his deathbed. His boyfriend, who hounded homosexuals later on in life, converted to Catholicism. John Henry Newman, whom this Pope wants to canonize, was also homosexual. This Pope has something for gay saints. Jared Manley Hopkins, a great poet, converted to Catholicism. Why? One of the reasons, I think, is because Catholicism is also about aesthetics. And that's why some gay men in particular find a certain attraction to Roman Catholicism. If you go into my bedroom, you think you've entered a chapel. I have a large statue of the Blessed Virgin, a number of other statues, and one fellow turned around, and who incidentally is an atheist, he said, "Do you have sex in this room?" You know, so that's, I think, is the irony, that the Catholic Church does a pretty bad job at promoting itself. I mean, it attracts a number of gay men. It's a club, okay? You know, you'd feel at home without any problem. The problem, I think, that has happened is that they sort of have a sanitized version of history. And what I am suggesting is that we should rewrite history. Because when they speak about tradition, okay, my idea of Roman Catholic tradition is that it is a tradition about dissidence. Any person looking at the history of the Catholic Church will see that it's a constant battle, you know, of trying to preserve the faith right throughout the centuries. And there, I think, that's the challenge that we face. We've got to really look at rewriting this history, making this history as our own, and not simply dismissing any particular faith as being automatically against us.
Thank you. And Maurice, did you want to take up the question or not? Are you fine? Thank you.
Where I attended my chapel, which was based in Auckland in a place called Panmure. However, somehow I must have got caught out because right next to our chapel, in our public car park, was a public toilet there. So after time when my parents knew that I'd be at church, and when it finished, I was somehow down there at the beach. So, and until some of the other members kind of noticed things that were happening with me. The question was how I was treated, or through that not being allowed to be back into the faith again. It's one of those things that as a Mormon, where these things try to get, you know, put under the carpet type of thing, and you know, you're sent home or packing or other things like that. But what I've found in some of my I was very lucky as a teenager that I didn't take it to heart that my religion was the only thing that I had for me. Of course, I was Māori, and I knew that I was gay. So I had those supports there. But if I can just give you a statistic from where the Mormon Church is from, which is in Utah, they had the 10th highest suicide rate, and where young men from the ages of 15 to 21 commit suicide, which is about 4 times the national average for USA. And just what I've got is that GLBTIQ teens are 3 times more likely to commit suicide as heterosexual teens.
I also wanted to respond to the question of community and religion and faith. And I agree with you. You know, when I was a teenager, I went to church because of community. I think it's a very important part of my spirituality and my faith. And you go to church, and I was even in the Legion of Mary. Those of you who are Catholic, Legion of Mary, for a teenager, it's a pretty big thing. I can say the Magnificat. I can sing it for you if you want. The Magnificat is basically what Mary said when she first met the angel Gabriel and was told that, you know, she was going to be the mother of God, and what she said. And so that was our prayer every day, praising God. And so I was very much a part of this community. It was a very important community. One of the most liberating things that I ever heard in a sermon was actually in St. Francis Church in downtown Melbourne. And the priest actually said, you know, when you come to church, you're not here just to listen to me. The word of God, you know, as the priest saying it, it could be something that you see on your way to church. It could be something that you see and hear. It might be a line from a hymn. It could be any. It doesn't have to be even in my sermon. It may not even come from it, but it's something that, you know. And that was the most uplifting thing for me in terms of my belief in God. And so if I look at the community, if I am part of a community, and if the community decides that it wants to judge me and hurt me, then I don't need to put myself in a situation where I'm going to be in an abusive relationship. It's not right, you know. If you're in an abusive relationship, get out of it, really. And if this community that I feel like I belong to starts to be abusive, then I have to move out of it. And so then I have to create my own community. I find my community elsewhere. And it's the same struggle when I'm in the gay community. If I'm, for example, I can see it now in a month's time when I'm celebrating Christmas in a gay community, and if somebody in the middle of a Christmas party is going to say that God is shit, it's going to spoil my night. As much as going to church and somebody tell me being gay is a sin. Do you know what I'm saying? So it's about the community, and if you start being abusive in that community, you need to really re-examine what's going on. I think for me that's how I see it. And so it's about reconciling those two, that I'm going to be part of these two communities that's almost at war with each other and not believing in each other, and how do you navigate that? I think that's really important as well.
Thank you.
Oh, sorry.
Yes.
And sorry, I'm quoting from Georgina Bayer again. And Takatapu, which I mentioned before, should define the line between what we accept and what we tolerate. We should never accept being tolerated. We should only tolerate being accepted for who and what we are.
Thank you. We've got one here, then one here, and one at the back. So 1, 2, 3, and then we'll keep going. Thank you.
My name's Catherine. I was at a workshop the other day for work, actually, and it was about raising cultural awareness around Indigenous Australian issues, and the moderator was fantastic. She opened the workshop by going around the room and asking people how they would describe their identity, and that's how open she left it. And it was really interesting hearing people's responses. Most people focused on their ethnic identity. Other people threw in their sexuality or their gender, or the fact that they were a mother or a father, or an aunt or uncle or whatever. And one of the themes that sort of came out of that general discussion and the end of the day, and I'll sort of pick up on one of the points before about how ethnicity and identity isn't static or homogenous, and it can change at different points in your life, and you can identify more strongly with different parts of your identity at different times. and I remember thinking, well, you know, when it was coming to me, how am I going to respond to this? Because I'm not really sure how to describe my identity. And I ended up just saying, look, you know, well, this is where my parents were from, and this is where my grandparents were from. But, you know, my partner's Muslim Pakistani. I'm part of her family. We're about to have a child that will be part of that family as well. And had, you know, who knows how they'll identify. Will they identify as Muslim, or will they reach out to my grandmother's history as being German Jewish, or will they just go, well, I don't really identify with either of those things, and pick something else that we don't identify with. And so it was just sort of, it was really interesting kind of examining that and hearing other people talking about it. And then today, just hearing people talking about, well, your identity is constantly shifting, and it's what you decide it to be. And yeah, it's important to kind of be empowered by that, as well as, you know, restricted and saddened, and take what's the best out of it for you.
Thank you. Unless anyone wants to respond, we'll move on to the next speaker.
My name's Peter Fasano, and I just want to know, in each of your countries, if there's been a gay disability group in each of your countries, and why those countries aren't allowing people with disabilities who've got sexual problems in those countries.
Thank you. Very important question. Yeah.
I grew up in Malaysia and Singapore, and then Australia, and I've spent most of my time in Australia, but can I talk a little briefly about Malaysia and Singapore. And the way that we treat people with disabilities is actually very disrespectful, to be very honest. There isn't an understanding, and I think the way we look at disability in those countries is still very much stuck in the 1960s. It's about institutionalization, it's about not talking about it. You know, for example, going to a Catholic school in Singapore, we had to do charity works. Okay, and so one of the prescribed charity works is to visit the institutions and spend a day, you know, doing charity work. When it's not, that's actually a very disrespectful view of working with disabilities. So when you want to talk about sexuality and disabilities, we're not even there. So there isn't that recognition, and a lot of families would not talk about their family members who have disabilities, or you would not see them very much. It's very much hidden away. But I might add that that's also happening quite a little bit here in Australia with the ethnic communities. There's a very good group that's working with ADEC. It's a Action on Disabilities for Ethnic Communities, which is based in the northern suburbs, which does amazing work with people from ethnic backgrounds and disabilities, because there's a very strong cultural stigma in that space. And talking about sexuality, they're not even there yet. Yeah, so they need to address a few things along the way.
Anybody else?
I mean, as far as Malta is concerned, probably in terms of people with disability, you know, a great many changes have taken place in the last 2 decades. What is really quite surprising, though, is that at the helm of these changes in attitude has been the Roman Catholic Church. And that is really quite incredible. That, you know, the governments basically sat back and did nothing. You know, history doesn't go really the way sometimes we expect it or we want it. It goes, it's like 78. You know, none of us thought that Mardi Gras was going to be so important. It was only a walk down the park. Okay, it ended up being the most significant event in terms of our history. The same thing, I think, with attitudes towards disabled people. They have changed, but the attitudes still persist, especially within the gay scene. You know, the pursuit of beauty as we see it. I remember as a young boy, I used to go to a school, and there was a young boy who had polio, and I still remember to this day, you know, my attempts to avoid him. It was just an attitude, you know. I imagine it just was a result of that view that if there was something wrong with you, a physical ailment, you know, something wrong mentally, then that was a sign that you or your parents had done something wrong in the eyes of God, and that was a punishment. You know, they're the sort of things we've got to overcome.
Yeah. You can say something or hand it on, it's up to you.
Oh, sorry.
I used to work for about 3 years with services for people with an intellectual disability, and there wasn't, just similar to what Shanton has said, there wasn't anything that was there for them, unfortunately. And however, on the other end, I was actually sort of like ostracised as being a gay man in a home that was for the community that had moved out into their own homes, because I wasn't allowed to express to them that they could feel free to express their own, sexuality in their own homes. So.
I'm going to just make a quick comment. Pakistan is very much based on a classist society, not caste, but class, so which basically means have and have not. So those that have access to opportunity, jobs, education, the whole works. So if a person in that particular class has a disability, it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be an impediment to that person's advancement in every sphere and strata of life. However, if the person with a disability is in the lowest of the lowest rung of that society, then they're going to be stuck in that medical model of you have a disability, you are part of the welfare system, you can't do anything. So and also sexuality figures into that as well, in that there is this huge underground queer gay community, and when I visit Pakistan every few years, I'm out to everyone and I'm totally safe because I come from the class of educated elite. And I know many gay men and, same-sex attracted women as well because of a particular classroom. But if we were of a different class, it wouldn't be so easy to be out and open. See? Now, having said that, I'll quickly fast forward to Australia. Now, I've been working until about 1.5 years ago. I've been in the disability community legal sector, and it was an incredible shift for me, who had been raised with that approach to viewing the disability rather than the ability of the person, not understanding what a social model of health is, to start working with people with disabilities as clients and as colleagues, and actually seeing myself as someone with a medical condition as a person with a disability, because disability to me always meant you're broken, something's wrong, you're of no use. So it's been an incredible journey for me that happened quite quickly, of course, moving back to Australia and working in the community sector and actually seeing just the way we view people with disabilities. And I briefly got involved with the people who do the, this is a couple of years ago, the sexuality and disability forums, and try and push, the positive appreciation or the positive approach that people with disabilities do have a sexuality, and to not over-sexualise them or de-sexualise them as well.
Thank you. And we've got some questions. Ahmad was next over there, and then we've got the other person in the shirt. That's 2. Anyone? And then, sorry, there was a person there first. So 1, 2, 3, and then we'll see how we go. Okay. And then Ahmad first. Sorry, Ahmad.
Hello. Hello. It's a bit strange. My name is Ahmed Musa. I work for the Ethnic Communities Council of Victoria. I'm a policy officer. I am a former academic. I used to teach at RMIT University. I've done my research on intercultural competence, my PhD, and I just developed a paper on youth, ethnic. Well, we're looking at migrant communities, second, third generation Australian youth, and the development of their own self-identity, and how we can create a positive, healthy identity in Australian youth. Someone just pointed earlier that with the young generation in particular, due to advancement in technology and connecting with people in diasporic communities around the world, they're no longer confined to a specific, static identity that is, they don't have any more connections with the traditional sense of an identity, the national, how we define an identity in a national context, for example, being Australian with these values, or associating themselves with their ethnic group as a static, body. They pick and choose what feels right for them in the context that they're in. And sexuality comes as part of an identity. So they don't see themselves dictated by their sexuality today as well. So it only fits in as one element of their identity. So I think there's, in terms of visibility, I think with the younger generation, there's a lot more visibility and acceptance with that. I mean, obviously there are certain pockets in different communities where we do not talk about and we do not discuss sexuality, but they pick and find a community based on what feels right for them, on the different individuals that they interact with. So it does not have to be, I've created a community because of my ethnic heritage, my culture, my religion, my sexuality. There's a lot more things, certain elements in each and every one of us that we could connect on different levels, and that's the kind of community that they're creating. So I think in terms of where we're heading, I think we're heading in a very different direction, particularly amongst generation. I mean, the generation that is 14, 13 and 12 years old. I think things are changing to the better, I hope.
Thank you. Just before the next speaker, I just want to commend Ahmad and Weza Chow and Sarah Hunt, because at the Federation of Ethnic Communities Councils of Australia National Conference in Shepparton, your paper and only one other were the only ones that actually mentioned sexuality and put it out there. And that's something that we need to think about. Next speaker.
Hello, so I'm Julian Lair, and I'm a relatively recent migrant to Australia. And my background is French, and my mother's side are Italian migrants to France, and then, well, they settled there. Now I moved here. Anyway, the kind of question that I would like to ask is, based on the personal experience that I have of gay identity, I always have a problem with the way gay history is told, because this is going to be a very French comment, but I experienced that as American imperialism. Like, you read gay history, and there's all of this, oh, there used to be sodomy laws, but then we fought, and then we got rid of the sodomy laws. And I think, hey, sodomy laws, in France they were abolished at the end of the Middle Ages, more or less. And, 96, people could still go to jail for having sex between men. And it's just like, wow, that's bizarre. So there's these things, there's the big Stonewall revolts, and you think, well, yeah, but that was in New York. How does that affect me from where I come from? And other things, like the idea that, there's a gay liberation that is part of a big liberation against Puritanism. And having a mother from North Italy and a father from southern France, Puritanism never really run in the family. Like, sex was relatively open, and I got an aunt living in a threesome, and that's kind of okay, and all of these things. So I wonder if anyone coming from a different background has the same impression that gay identity is this kind of bizarre Central American meet Western thing that you react against sodomy laws and Puritanism, or if I'm the only one in that case.
Good question, thank you. Madeline, yeah, I can give you this one.
Yeah. There's so many microphones.
I know.
Hopefully I won't break anything. The thing that I can take, I mean, I probably agree with you with the American imperialism stuff, but what I would probably take from that, as a feminist and as a lesbian, is the concept of lesbian invisibility and also women's invisibility throughout history. And there's so many women's stories that have never been told, and lesbian stories are part of that. So for me, it's about history being written by men, not necessarily about Americans per se, or an imperialist concept of it. It's more about a patriarchal construct. So that's where I feel the big silences are. And I guess, with an earlier question asking about lesbian histories, the reason I don't know is because I feel like a lot of it's not written, or a lot of it is written and very vaguely alluded to, and you're kind of grasping at straws with these two women who lived together vaguely once, maybe, and no one knew if they were sisters or really good friends or lesbians. And I kind of get sick of reading through the euphemisms and trying to find the actual content. So that's sort of my take on it.
Thank you.
I think your analysis of history is, with all due respect, somewhat simplistic. Just because you come from a civil law system, it doesn't mean there wasn't discrimination in France. I mean, Lord Alfred Douglas, for example, escaped from England to go to France, but then all of a sudden he found he was being greatly discriminated against in a number of well-known French hotels. What is important, I think, is that first of all the issue of sodomy was a great battle in many Anglo-Celtic countries. That of course did not affect lesbians, but lesbians joined the struggle, especially in Sydney. And one of the greatest fighters for decriminalisation was someone I knew. Her name was Margaret McMahon. She was actually on the back of the truck. She had had a number of operations on her heart, and she had died a few years later. She was nearly killed when the police took over the truck. But what is significant in Sydney is that the gay groups in Sydney decided to put the issue of decriminalisation after other issues, for example, relationships with the police. And it is for that reason that we had the anti-discrimination legislation brought into the New South Wales Parliament before homosexual acts were decriminalised. That didn't happen in other states. So I think we've got to be very, very careful that we don't do the same mistake that say, theologians do. They present a short version of their history, because even Americans have made great contributions. I'm trying to think of that American one, and his name Boswell. I mean, he's made incredible contributions towards the study of Christianity. A lot of the daring research has been done by Americans, and in Sydney we followed the same route because we were affected by Stonewall. Stonewall wasn't just a battle against decriminalisation. Stonewall really, the greatest component of the protesters, they were young people who basically were poor, who used to live in the streets, who worked as hustlers. That's where our liberation started. It didn't start with middle-aged men who were lawyers.
Thank you, Joseph. Anyone from the floor who'd like to take up that issue? Because it's a very important one. Asvin, did I see your hand go up?
Yeah, but I want to respond to the gay and lesbian disability rather than the
I'm aware of the timing that we've got other speakers, so did you want to do that very quickly now? Or should we?
Yeah,
okay.
I can do that. The reason I want to stand up because it's very important for us to actually, as a worker within this organisation, to respond to that. We recently in the process of looking in terms of forming a partnership with a number of governmental departments, and it has been extremely political minefield in order to navigate our way through to work with the gay and lesbian with disability. And then when it comes to disability, just like Asian, there are so many form of disability that fall into one word. We need to basically unpack that. It's just extremely difficult. Having said that, we are in the process of doing that. It's not a promise because it's really from just 2 or 3 telephone conversations at the moment, but we are looking into it. We do our best. And one more thing, a lot of I work with gay men who have worked with in the previously do not want to be put into a disability group. That's another thing. Who then, their needs and my needs and who needs are they we actually responsible for and responded to.
Thank you. We've got to.
They don't want to be identified as we put into a disability.
Sorry, pardon me. We'll have to just keep it moving. Michael was next. The next speaker, Michael, and then there was someone here, Ken, and there'll be a third person there, and then fourth. So we've got 4. We'll see how we go with time. Keith, that's right. Michael.
Thanks, Maria. Just some comments, reflections. Also, I'm Michael Kelly. Some of you may know me from my work with activism in the Rainbow Sash movement, and also as a gay Catholic writer and commentator. And I also have a strong background in studying Christian mysticism from a gay perspective, which I'm pursuing as a PhD at the moment. And Maria also wanted me to say something about the Parliament of Religions as well. But as I've been listening, 3 things have been coming to me. One is the personal journey and the importance of the personal journey, which we heard about quite a bit of at the start. But then what's emerged is also the importance of the intellectual, the research, that we either do it or we know that people are doing it, but we are aware of it, which is unpacking the history, deconstructing a lot of the texts and the dogmas, and the reimagining of constructive theology in the different kinds of religions, so that the material and the past can be reformed and transformed for the future. And that's really serious work that kind of has to be done. Otherwise the personal becomes just this kind of inner thing of me and God, which is sort of all very nice. But even to get to that point, you need some kind of information, some sort of capacity to think outside the box that you've been given, and that's the intellectual